Respect isn't inherited, it's earned, and the hardest lesson my son learned came when bullets started flying through our kitchen window. My name is Frank, I'm 58, and for 3 years my own boy looked at me like I was nothing but a broken old man collecting disability checks. He had no idea that his weak father once led a special ops unit through the deadliest streets of Fallujah, or that the trembling hands he marked had once diffused bombs that could level city blocks. But let me start from the beginning, because this story isn't just about one night of violence. It's about 3 years of shame, disappointment, and a son who learned the hardest way possible that heroes don't always look like what you see in movies. Tyler was 8 when I came home from my final deployment. Back then, he still thought I was Superman in combat boots. He'd brag to his friends about his dad fighting the bad guys overseas, show off the pictures I'd send of helicopters and desert landscapes. I was his hero then, larger than life, invincible. But war changes you in ways an 8-year-old can't understand. The IED that took out my convoy in Ramadi didn't just leave me with a purple heart and a permanent limp. It left me with night terrors that had me screaming at 3 a.m., flashbacks triggered by car backfires, and an inability to be in crowded spaces without feeling like I was going to lose my mind. The VA diagnosed me with severe PTSD, gave me a handful of medications, and a monthly disability check that never felt like enough compensation for losing pieces of your soul. Tyler watched his Superman turn into someone who couldn't go to his school plays because too many people in one room made me sweat through my shirt. Someone who couldn't drive certain routes because they reminded me of patrol roads where we'd lost good men. Someone who spent hours staring out windows, not because I was spacing out, but because hypervigilance never really turns off when you've spent 20 years scanning for threats. The first time I disappointed him was at his 9th birthday party. I'd promised to grill burgers for all his friends, but when the neighbor's motorcycle backfired, I hit the deck so hard I knocked over the cake table. 20 kids stared at me lying flat on the ground, hands over my head, reliving a mortar attack from 3 years prior. Dad's just tired, Tyler told his friends, his face burning with embarrassment. That was the beginning of the end of me being his hero. By the time he turned 11, I'd become an embarrassment he had to manage. When his friends came over, he'd quickly usher them upstairs before they could see me taking my handful of PTSD medications or notice the way I jumped when the TV got too loud. Maybe Dad can pick me up later, he'd tell his friends, instead of asking me to drive him places, because he never knew if I'd have a good day or a bad day. The worst part was watching him stop believing in me entirely. The man who'd once carried him on his shoulders, who'd taught him to throw a baseball, who'd promised to always protect him. That man had been replaced by someone who couldn't even protect himself from his own memories. When Tyler hit 13, the shame turned into active resentment. Middle school is brutal enough without having a father who's a walking reminder of failure and weakness. Why can't you just be normal? He asked me one particularly bad evening when I'd had a panic attack in the grocery store checkout line. Some teenager had dropped a bag of cans, and the sound sent me right back to incoming mortars in Afghanistan. Tyler had to help me out to the car while other shoppers stared. I'm trying, son, I said, but we both knew trying wasn't enough. Other dads coach Little League and go to work every day, he continued, his voice cruel in the way only teenagers can manage. Other dads don't freak out over every little sound. Other dads aren't broken. Broken. That word hit harder than any IED ever could. Tyler started lying to his friends about what I did for work. Instead of admitting his dad was a disabled veteran living on government checks, he'd make up stories about me being away on business trips or working night shifts. Anything to avoid explaining why his father spent most days at home, jumping at shadows and taking pills that made him tired and distant. The lies got more elaborate as he got older. I was a consultant who worked from home. I was recovering from a sports injury. I was writing a book. Anything except the truth. His father was a broken soldier who couldn't function in the real world. But here's what Tyler didn't understand, and what I couldn't explain to him without sounding like I was making excuses. Those hypervigilant instincts that embarrassed him so much were still there for a reason. The way I positioned myself with my back to walls in restaurants, the way I automatically scanned every room for exits, the way I unconsciously tracked patterns in our neighborhood. All of that was still active military training, just without a mission. Until the mission found us. The changes in our neighborhood started small. New faces on the corner, cars with tinted windows driving slowly past our house, teenagers wearing colors that meant something to those who knew how to read them. I noticed because noticing was what had kept me alive for 2 decades of military service. But to Tyler, I was just being paranoid again. Dad, not everyone is a terrorist, he'd say when I mentioned the unusual activity. This isn't Afghanistan, it's suburban Ohio. He was right about it not being Afghanistan. What he didn't realize was that some threats don't need a different country to be dangerous. The first real incident happened on a Thursday after school. Tyler was walking home from basketball practice when I saw three older kids corner him near the bus stop. I was checking our mail when I heard the commotion, voices raised, the sound of someone being pushed against a fence. From my position, I could see everything. Three gang members, wearing red bandanas and tank tops despite the October cold, had my son backed against a chain-link fence. The body language was all wrong, aggressive postures, hands moving toward waistbands, the kind of positioning that meant violence was seconds away. Every instinct I'd developed in 20 years of military service screamed at me to intervene. But every lesson I'd learned about living with PTSD in civilian life told me to be careful, to not overreact, to remember that this wasn't a war zone. Your daddy, the crazy vet, ain't gonna help you here, I heard one of them say as I got closer. We heard about him, heard he's too messed up to even leave the house most days. That's when I realized Tyler's embarrassment about me had become neighborhood knowledge. Kids talk, and apparently the story of Frank, the broken veteran, was good entertainment for teenage gossips. Please, I don't want any trouble, Tyler was saying, his voice shaking. I'll just go home. Nah, you ain't going nowhere, the biggest one said, pushing Tyler hard enough to make him stumble. This is M-13 territory now, and you live here, you pay here. M-13. The name hit me like ice water. These weren't just neighborhood bullies or wannabe gangsters. M-13 was serious business, organized, violent, and completely ruthless. I'd heard briefings about them during my last deployment when they were spreading into military towns, targeting service families they saw as weak or isolated. I forced myself to approach slowly, hands visible, non-threatening posture. Everything I'd learned about de-escalation in urban warfare environments. Evening, gentlemen, I said in my calmest voice. Beautiful night for a walk. The three kids turned to look at me, and I saw Tyler's face flush with embarrassment even in the middle of being threatened. His father, the neighborhood joke, had come to rescue him in his bathrobe and house slippers. Walk away, Pops, the leader said, sizing me up dismissively. This ain't your business, and you don't look like you're in any shape to make it your business. Actually, it is my business, I replied, positioning myself between them and Tyler with movements so subtle they probably didn't notice. That's my son you're having a conversation with, the leader laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Your son, the one who tells everyone his daddy's too crazy to function. Yeah, we heard about you, soldier boy. Heard you're real good at hiding in your house and jumping at loud noises. What happened next was interesting. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the beginning of what Tyler would recognize as one of my anxiety episodes. My hands started to shake slightly, my breathing got shallow, and for a moment I could feel myself slipping into that headspace where I wasn't in Ohio anymore, but back in a place where children carried bombs and every shadow might hide a sniper. But this time, instead of fighting the flashback, I let it come. Because sometimes the line between PTSD and tactical awareness is thinner than people realize. Boys, I said, and my voice carried something that made all three of them take a step back. You're going to walk away now. You're going to remember that this street belongs to families, not gangs, and you're going to spread the word that Tyler and his family are off limits. Or what? The leader challenged, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. You'll call the cops, file a complaint, cry about it. I looked each of them in the eye, one by one, with the kind of stare I'd used on insurgents in Fallujah when I needed them to understand that continuing down their current path would end very badly for them. Or I'll remind you why they gave me these decorations, I said quietly, gesturing to the purple heart pin I still wore on my jacket. And trust me, boys, you don't want me to remember what I'm capable of when someone threatens my family. Something in my tone, or maybe something in my eyes, made the leader's bravado crumble. These were street-smart kids who knew how to read danger, and whatever they saw in me was enough to make them back down. This ain't over, the leader said as they walked away, but it was face-saving bluster, not a real threat. As soon as they were gone, Tyler turned on me with fury and embarrassment. Dad, what the hell? Do you know how much worse you just made this for me? Tyler, no, seriously. Now they know my dad is some kind of crazy vet who thinks he's still at war. They're going to tell everyone at school. I'm going to be the kid whose psycho father threatened gang members. I wanted to explain to him that what he'd just witnessed wasn't psychosis or PTSD acting up. It was 20 years of combat experience recognizing a threat and neutralizing it with minimum force. But Tyler wasn't ready to hear that yet. I was protecting you, I said simply. I don't need protection from you, he shot back. I need you to stop embarrassing me. But as we walked back to the house, I noticed something that Tyler didn't. For the first time since the confrontation started, he wasn't walking ahead of me in shame. He was walking beside me, and every few steps he'd glance over like he was seeing something he'd never noticed before. The next few weeks were tense. True to their word, the gang members spread stories about the crazy veteran who'd threatened them. But instead of making Tyler's life worse, something unexpected happened. Other kids started treating him with a different kind of respect. Apparently, having a father who could make Sminus 13 back down, even if he was crazy, was worth something in the social hierarchy of teenagers who dealt with gang pressure every day. But I knew this was just the beginning. Sminus 13 doesn't just walk away from territory they want to claim, and they certainly don't forget about disrespect. They were planning something bigger, and every instinct I had was screaming that we needed to be ready. I started doing things that probably looked like paranoia to Tyler, but were actually tactical preparation. I mapped out our neighborhood's blind spots, noted which houses had good sight lines, identified potential escape routes and defensive positions. I started paying closer attention to the gang's patterns when they moved through our area, how many there were, what kind of weapons they might be carrying. To Tyler, I was just being weird again. Dad, why are you drawing maps of the neighborhood? Why do you keep checking the locks on all the doors? Why did you move my bed away from the window? Just being careful, I'd say, which was true, but not the whole truth. The whole truth was that I'd recognized something in that leader's eyes during our confrontation. He wasn't just some street punk playing gangster. He had the look of someone who'd seen real violence, who'd been trained in more than just intimidation tactics. The way he'd positioned his friends, the way he'd kept his hands free, the way he'd scanned our surroundings, those were combat habits, not street habits. Someone had taught him how to fight like a soldier. That realization changed everything for me. This wasn't just about neighborhood kids playing dress-up in gang colors. This was about trained fighters who saw our quiet residential street as strategically valuable territory, and they were planning to take it. The explosion came at 11:47 p.m. on a Friday night in November. Not gunshots or shouting, an actual explosion that shattered every window on the south side of our house and sent me instantly into combat mode. Contact, contact, get down. I was shouting before I was fully conscious, my body moving on pure muscle memory as I rolled out of bed and hit the floor. Tyler's scream from across the hall snapped me back to reality. This wasn't Afghanistan. This was home. But the sound of automatic weapons fire erupting outside our house made the distinction less important than it should have been. I low-crawled to Tyler's room, where I found him huddled behind his bed, crying and calling for me. Dad, Dad, what's happening? Are we being bombed? Gang war, I said, pulling him close and assessing our situation. Both sides are using our street as a battleground. Through the shattered window, I could see muzzle flashes from both ends of the street. M-13 in their red bandanas had taken position behind cars on the east side, while what looked like Bloods in blue were firing from the west side. Our house, and about 6 others, were directly in the crossfire zone. We need to get to the basement, I told Tyler. Right now. I'm scared, he said, and for the first time in years, he sounded like the little boy who used to run to me when he had nightmares. I know you are, I said, checking my watch and calculating response times. But I'm going to keep you safe. That's what dads do. We made it to the basement just as a spray of bullets punched through our front door where we'd been standing moments before. I set up a defensive position by the small window that gave me a view of the street, and that's when I did something that changed everything between Tyler and me. I opened the emergency case I'd hidden behind the water heater and pulled out equipment Tyler had never seen before. Not just my service pistol, but full tactical gear, body armor, night vision scope, communication equipment, and enough ammunition for a sustained firefight. Dad, Tyler whispered, watching me methodically check my weapon and strap on gear I hadn't worn in 3 years. What is all this stuff? Insurance, I said simply. The kind they don't sell at State Farm. As I geared up, I explained what was happening in terms Tyler could understand. 2 gangs are fighting for control of this territory. Our house is in the middle, which makes us either collateral damage or strategic assets. Either way, we're in danger. But the police, response time for active gunfire is 15 to 20 minutes, I interrupted. We've got maybe 5 minutes before one side or the other decides to use these houses for cover or hostages. That's when Tyler asked the question I'd been dreading for years. Dad, are you going to be okay? I mean, with your PTSD and everything. Can you handle this? I looked at my son, this boy who'd spent 3 years ashamed of his broken father, and told him the truth he'd never been old enough to hear before. Tyler, PTSD isn't what makes me weak. It's what happens when someone who's been strong for too long finally gets to stop. All those symptoms you're embarrassed by. The hypervigilance, the way I scan rooms, the way I position myself near exits, that's not sickness. That's 20 years of training that never turns off. I don't understand. You will, I said, watching gang members move tactically through our neighbor's yard. Unfortunately, you're about to get a first-hand education in exactly what your old man is capable of when the mission matters. What happened next wasn't just a firefight. It was a coordinated assault on our entire neighborhood by 2 gangs that had decided civilian casualties were acceptable losses in their territorial dispute. Through my scope, I watched M-13 members break into the house across the street while the family was still inside. I heard screaming, saw them dragging Mr. and Mrs. Peterson out at gunpoint. They weren't just seeking cover, they were taking hostages. That's when everything changed for me. This wasn't about gang territory anymore. This was about innocent people being terrorized in their own homes. And I'd sworn an oath 20 years ago to protect innocent people from exactly this kind of violence. Tyler, I said, my voice carrying the kind of authority I hadn't used since my last deployment. I need you to listen very carefully. I'm going to leave you here for a few minutes, but I'm not abandoning you. I'm going to help our neighbors, and then I'm coming back. Dad, don't leave me alone, he pleaded. I'm not leaving you alone, I corrected. I'm leaving you in the safest place in this house with communication equipment so you can call for help if you need to. There's a difference between alone and tactically positioned. I handed him my old military radio, set to the emergency frequency. If anyone other than me comes down those stairs, you call out on this radio. Say Alpha 7 needs immediate assistance and give them our address. There are people listening who will come help. But Dad, Tyler, those people across the street are about to die unless someone helps them. And right now, I'm the only someone available who has the training to help them without getting them killed in the process. For the first time since I'd been home, I saw something in Tyler's eyes that I'd almost forgotten trust. Not the blind faith of a child, but the conscious choice of someone who understood the situation and believed I could handle it. Go help them, he said. I'll be okay. What happened over the next 45 minutes was the most intense urban combat I'd experienced since Ramadi. Two gangs with military-grade weapons, civilian hostages, residential terrain with limited sight lines, and multiple concealment opportunities. But here's the thing about 20 years of special forces training. It doesn't just teach you how to fight. It teaches you how to think like the enemy, how to use terrain to your advantage, how to neutralize threats with minimal collateral damage. The M-13 team holding the Petersons had made a tactical error by setting up in a house I'd been in dozens of times for neighborhood barbecues. I knew the layout, the blind spots, the structural weak points. I went in through the basement window they didn't know existed, using knowledge of the house's architecture that only a long-time neighbor would have. The first gang member never knew I was there until I put him down with a non-lethal shot to the shoulder. The second one was smarter, using Mrs. Peterson as a human shield while he tried to call for backup. But he made the mistake of standing where I knew the old floorboards creaked, telegraphing his exact position. The third one was the real challenge, clearly military trained, moving with discipline and using proper cover techniques. This wasn't some street punk playing soldier. This was someone who'd seen real combat, but I had advantages he didn't. I knew every house on this street, every yard, every hiding spot that neighborhood kids had used for decades. More importantly, I knew that his mission was to control territory, while mine was to save lives. That gave me options he didn't have. When I finally had a clear shot, I took it. Center mass, threat neutralized, hostages safe. But that was just one house. The Bloods had taken the Martinez family on the other side of the street, and both gangs were sending reinforcements. This was turning into a full-scale urban warfare scenario, and I was one man with limited ammunition facing what appeared to be dozens of gang members with automatic weapons. That's when I remembered something my old sergeant major used to say. You don't have to outgun them, Frank. You just have to outthink them. I'd been thinking like a defender, trying to protect individual families house by house. But that was a losing strategy against superior numbers. I needed to think like an attacker, to take the initiative and force them to react to me instead of the other way around. The gang's weakness was their lack of discipline. They were thinking like criminals, not soldiers. They wanted to control territory and terrorize civilians, but they weren't prepared for organized resistance. I had knowledge they didn't. The neighborhood's layout, the residents' routines, the police response patterns, and 20 years of experience in exactly this kind of urban combat scenario. More importantly, I had motivation they couldn't match. This wasn't about money or territory or reputation. This was about protecting my home, my neighbors, and my son. I spent the next 20 minutes systematically dismantling their operation, not by engaging them directly, but by using their own tactics against them. Their communications were unsecured radio frequencies that I could monitor and disrupt. Their positioning assumed they were fighting civilians, not someone with military training. Their escape routes were based on street-level knowledge, not the kind of neighborhood familiarity that comes from living somewhere for 15 years. One by one, I neutralized their advantages, cut their communications, disrupted their positioning, blocked their escape routes. I turned our suburban neighborhood into a tactical nightmare for anyone who didn't know it like I did. When the police finally arrived, they found something unprecedented. Two gang armies that had been completely outmaneuvered by a single opponent. Weapons scattered, gang members fleeing in confusion, hostages safe, and not a single civilian casualty. I made it back to our basement just as the police were securing the scene. Tyler was exactly where I'd left him, but the look on his face was completely different from when I'd left. "Dad," he said quietly, "I heard everything on the radio. The police were talking to each other about what happened out there." "What did they say?" "They said whoever did this had to be military. Special forces, maybe Navy SEALs. They said it was the most professional tactical operation they'd ever seen in a civilian setting." I sat down beside him, suddenly feeling every one of my 58 years. "Tyler, there are things about my service that I've never told you. Things I couldn't tell you because you weren't ready to understand them." "I'm ready now," he said, and I could hear in his voice that he meant it. So I told him. Not everything. Some secrets are too dark for anyone to carry, but enough. I told him about the missions that didn't make the news, about the times I'd gone into situations like tonight and brought everyone home alive, about why they'd given me medals that I'd never shown him, about why other soldiers still called me when they needed advice on impossible situations. "All these years," Tyler said slowly, "I thought you were broken because you couldn't handle normal life. But you weren't broken. You were just programmed for a different kind of life." "Something like that," I agreed. "And tonight, when our neighbors needed someone who was programmed for this kind of situation, I remembered what I was good at." I finished. We sat there in the basement for a long time, listening to police radios and sirens, while Tyler processed what he'd learned about his father. When he finally spoke again, his voice was different, older, more serious. "Dad, I owe you an apology, not just for tonight, but for the last 3 years. I was ashamed of you because I didn't understand what you'd been through or what you were capable of. I thought PTSD meant you were weak, but it actually means you were strong enough to survive things that would have destroyed other people." "Tyler." "No, let me finish," he said, sounding more like a man than the boy who'd been embarrassed by me that morning. "Tonight I watched you save our entire neighborhood, not just our house, not just our family, but everyone. And you did it because it was the right thing to do, even though it put you in danger." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I want to understand. I want to know about your service, about what you've been through, about how to be the kind of man who runs toward danger when other people need help." The weeks following the gang war changed everything in our relationship, but not in the way you might expect. Tyler didn't suddenly start treating me like a hero or bragging about what I'd done. Instead, he started treating me like a person, someone with a complex history, difficult experiences, and skills that were both valuable and hard to live with. He began asking questions about my PTSD, not so he could fix it or make it go away, but so he could understand what I was dealing with and how to support me better. He learned that my hypervigilance wasn't paranoia. It was a survival skill that had kept me and my men alive in places where relaxing your guard for even a moment could get everyone killed. He stopped being embarrassed when I had anxiety episodes in public and started helping me manage them. He learned to recognize the signs when I was getting overwhelmed and would suggest we leave or find a quieter place to regroup. Most importantly, he stopped seeing my PTSD as a sign of weakness and started understanding it as evidence of what I'd been through. The nightmares, the flashbacks, the hypervigilance, all of it was the price I'd paid for doing a job that most people couldn't do, in places most people couldn't survive. "Dad," he said one evening about a month after the gang war, "I've been thinking about what I want to do after high school." "Oh yeah, what's that?" "I want to join the army. Not because I think war is cool or because I want to prove something, but because I want to understand what made you who you are, and because I think I want to be the kind of person who can help people when they need it most." I was quiet for a long time before answering. "Tyler, military service isn't something you do to understand your father or to prove you're tough. It's something you do because you believe in something bigger than yourself and you're willing to sacrifice for it. That's exactly why I want to do it, he said. Tonight taught me that there are people out there who prey on innocent families, and there need to be people willing to stand between them. You showed me what that looks like. And the cost, I asked. The possibility of coming home changed, damaged, dealing with things that never really go away. Tyler looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not pity or embarrassment, but respect mixed with determination. Dad, you didn't come home damaged. You came home carrying the weight of protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. If that's the cost of being able to do what you did tonight, then it's worth it. 6 months later, Tyler graduated high school and enlisted in the National Guard. But before he left for basic training, something happened that completed the transformation in our relationship. The mayor wanted to give me a civilian commendation for my actions during the gang war. I tried to refuse. I'd just been doing what needed to be done, but Tyler convinced me to accept it. Dad, you spent 20 years serving your country, and then you spent one night serving your community. People need to know that's who you are. The ceremony was small, just a few neighbors and local officials, but the words the mayor spoke changed how our entire neighborhood saw me. He talked about military service, about the skills I'd brought home, about the way I'd used my training to protect innocent people when they needed it most. But more importantly, Tyler spoke. He asked to say something before they presented the award, and what he said brought tears to my eyes. For 3 years, he said, addressing the small crowd, I was ashamed of my father. I thought his PTSD made him weak, that his military service was something to be embarrassed about. I didn't understand that the symptoms I saw weren't signs of weakness. They were signs of someone who'd been strong enough to carry burdens that would have broken other people. He paused, looking directly at me. 6 months ago, our neighborhood was attacked by armed gangs. Families were taken hostage, people were in danger, and the police were 20 minutes away. In that moment, we needed someone who knew how to fight, how to think tactically, how to neutralize threats without getting innocent people killed. My father didn't hesitate. He used 20 years of military training to save our neighbors, protect our community, and remind all of us that the price of freedom is having people willing to stand between good people and those who would hurt them. The applause was loud, but what mattered to me was the look on Tyler's face. Pride, not embarrassment, not shame, but genuine pride in having a father who'd served his country and his community. After the ceremony, as we walked home through the neighborhood where I'd fought my last battle, Tyler said something that I'll remember for the rest of my life. Dad, I'm sorry it took a gang war for me to understand who you really are. But I'm grateful that when our family and our neighbors needed a protector, we had one. Tyler shipped out to basic training on a Tuesday morning in June. I drove him to the recruiting station, and as he prepared to begin his own journey of service, he saluted me. Not the casual salute of someone playing soldier, but the crisp, respectful salute of someone who understood what military service meant and what it cost. Thank you, he said, for showing me what real strength looks like, and thank you for protecting us when it mattered most. I saluted him back, this young man who'd learned that heroes don't always look like what you see in movies. Sometimes they look like broken veterans with PTSD who spend their days taking medication and jumping at loud noises. Sometimes they're the people others overlook, dismiss, or feel sorry for, until the moment comes when their training, their experience, and their willingness to sacrifice matter more than anything else in the world. Tyler completed basic training with honors and is now serving as a combat medic. He calls me every week, not because he has to, but because he wants to. We talk about his training, about my experiences, about what it means to serve something bigger than yourself. The respect he shows me now isn't the blind admiration of a child for a parent. It's the conscious choice of one warrior acknowledging another. It's the recognition that strength isn't about never being broken. It's about continuing to serve others even when you are. That respect will never waver because Tyler learned it the hard way, in the basement of our house, while bullets flew overhead, and his old man proved that some things are worth fighting for, no matter how much they cost you. The gang members are in prison. Our neighborhood is safe. And my son finally knows who his father really is, not just the broken veteran with PTSD, but the man who would face any danger to protect the people he loves. That's what real strength looks like. That's what earned respect means. And that's why some battles are worth fighting, even when you thought your war was over. Some lessons can only be learned under fire. Some truths can only be understood when everything is at stake. And some respect can only be earned when you prove that the most important battles aren't the ones that make you a hero. They're the ones that make you a protector of heroes yet to come. Tyler learned all of that in one night, but it took me 20 years of service and 3 years of shame to understand that coming home broken doesn't mean coming home defeated. Sometimes it just means you're ready for the mission that matters most.